What couldn't you believe you had to explain to another adult? That no matter how much you might want to put a camo pattern on your walls, you, not the paint, have to determine what that pattern looks like. And you will also have to purchase multiple cans of paint tinted differently, because camo doesn't come out of a can that way. Story 2. Volunteered in a charity shop. Lady came to the counter with a top and asked if I could look in the back for one of the same color but a larger size. Tried to explain we don't do that because we're a charity shop. She insisted that other shops like H&M have done that for her. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Eventually, I just went in the back for a few minutes, made a cup of tea for a coworker, and came out saying we don't have any. She got mad at that too. Op shop, Australian for charity shop. We had a family come shop and place a massive heap of clothing on the counter, which they carefully and with much discussion divided into two. None of this discussion happened in English. So imagine our surprise when they said, "This one we will pay for. This one we will have for free." They did not have any of the vouchers the charity gives out for that sort of thing, and their free pile was all very expensive brands. That was a conversation I could not physically listen to. Very painful. Story 3. My husband had to explain to a coworker that she couldn't take a train from the US to Europe. She insisted she had to because she didn't like flying. This is one of those times where eventually you just have to say, "Okay, just make sure you send us which trains you're on so we know, and have a nice trip." Story 4. I had to explain to my mom that my daughter was growing in my uterus and not my stomach, so the hot sauce on my burrito wasn't going to cause her skin burns. I also explained if she were growing in my stomach would certainly cause way worse burns than hot sauce. It was then that I understood why the school nurse had to explain to me in 5th grade why I kept bleeding through my pants every month at school, and not my mom. Comment. There was a US senator who learned about cameras you could swallow to get images of the digestive system for medical analysis. He asked if the same technique could be used for women who might be pregnant to confirm the situation, as part of a campaign to make abortions illegal. He was told this was not possible because the stomach does not connect to the pussy. Story 5. When I worked at a doctor's clinic, I had a lady on the phone wanting to book an appointment to have her flu shot. She specifically asked it to be a telephone appointment. I could not believe that I had to explain to her that we cannot inject her through the phone. Comment. I used to manage an ENT and audiology department whilst epidemic was all the rage. You would not believe how many very, very senior people I had to tell that, no, our patient group of deaf people were not suitable for a telephone appointment. I know there are technical ways around this like minicom interpreters, etc. That is not what they were talking about. Story 6. And that New Zealand, the country we were both born, raised, and living in, is not in Europe. Edit to answer most of your questions. Her reasoning is that when she fills out forms and has to tick a box for her ethnicity, she ticks New Zealand European. She thought that option was there because we are European and therefore in Europe. I had to explain to her that just means she is of European descent, that her ancestors lived in Europe. I also had to explain that not every New Zealander ticks that box, that there are other ethnicities here too. Story 7. I worked tech support for an internet provider a few years back. A woman calls in complaining her Wi-Fi isn't working. Go through the normal troubleshooting questions. What's your device? How are you connected? And finally, what can you see on your screen? Crazy woman, CW. It's black, me. How do you mean? Are you getting errors? CW, the whole screen is black. Me, have you turned the laptop on? CW, I can't. Me, why not? CW, I've lost the charging cable. Me, okay. Do you have another device I can help you connect with? Maybe a tablet or your phone? CW. No, you need to get the laptop reconnected. Me. Can you go and buy another charging cable? CW. No, you need to send me one. Me. We don't supply them. Also, we didn't supply you with your laptop. We just provide internet. CW. Yes, and now you're not providing me internet. So you need to fix it 40 mins. This went on, as my team around me stared in incoherent disbelief that this woman couldn't understand why her internet provider couldn't connect Wi-Fi to a computer with now power. I remember hanging up the phone and putting myself on break. My manager looked at me and told me to take a walk, while barely hiding her unrestrained giggles. Comment? Having worked in IT help desk, the first question we always asked was, is your laptop, desktop, printer powered on? Which usually made them mad. Many times it was not on. People who don't hate making phone calls baffle me. If I'm having tech issues, you'd best believe that I'm restarting everything at least 5 times, unplugging and replugging every single cord a few times, reinstalling drivers, Googling the hell out of everything, and repeating the process for at least 3 days before calling anyone. And I'm usually just calling my dad because he works as an IT director. Then there's my husband who calls about the internet 5 minutes after it goes out instead of waiting a bit to see if it fixes itself. Story 8. I hope this isn't too racy for this sub, I had to explain to a grown, college-educated adult that no, anal sex does not cause AIDS. That no, if both parties are HIV negative, they cannot create AIDS by engaging in this activity. No, Daniel, that's not how viruses work. Comment. I was surprised to meet an adult man who told me he didn't wear condoms because he said he could tell if a girl had STDs by just looking if her pussy was normal, LOL. I feel like all those horrific pics of STDs we were shown during Kex Ed kind of backfired because I've heard more than one man tell me he thinks that STDs are all visual, and if the pussy looks normal, then she must not have STDs. Story 9. When you save a file on Windows, the save window actually lets you save the file into a particular folder. You don't have to go into your recent items to find it and then move it to where you want it to be saved. This person had been working an office job at a computer for more than 5 years at that point. I once taught someone that had been typing on computers for several decades that you can hold Shift plus letter to get a capital letter and that you don't have to turn caps lock on and off at the beginning of each sentence. I worked with a woman who would print PDFs, then fax them. She didn't know how to attach them to an email. She was a very successful realtor, and this was in 2014. Story 10. That driving north meant the whole trip was uphill. I laughed at her until I realized she meant it. Ended up laughing at myself because there's no way I was going to explain it to her. Story 11. I was picking up Italian liras one time, 1999, pre-Euros, from a bank in Tennessee. The teller brought me the envelope. When I opened it to count the money, she looked at me with total surprise and asked, "Do other countries have different money?" A bank teller. Story 12. That her power was shut off because she didn't pay her electric bill for 3 straight months. And the letters on neon yellow paper from the power company were sent to warn her of this happening. She thought she was legally entitled to free electricity because it's a requirement for human survival. Edit to add, she wasn't in need. She worked a very well-paying job, and she enjoyed shopping for expensive things. This was asterisk, not asterisk, one of those situations where she needed assistance or mercy. She needed a foot lodged firmly in the backside, and the power company put on its boots. Story 13. That raw meat juices, especially that of chicken, should in no way come in contact with other foods. I learned this in 8th grade home EC, so I was 13 years old. I had to explain to a 40-year-old that no, you can't put grilled chicken back on an unwashed cutting board that still has raw chicken juices. Comment. Used to work at a daycare. One day a little mouse entered the premises and caused an uproar until we caught and released it in the playground. After the whole ordeal, one of my colleagues, who was the dumbest person I've ever met, said, "Let's hope it didn't lay eggs anywhere." I was too stunned to speak and just stared at her, while my room leader friend said, in the most done with this crap way, "Mice don't lay eggs," and walked off. Story 14. And used to work at a daycare. One day a little mouse entered the premises and caused an uproar until we caught and released it in the playground. After the whole ordeal, one of my colleagues, who was the dumbest person I've ever met, said, "Let's hope it didn't lay eggs anywhere." I was too stunned to speak and just stared at her, while my room leader friend said, in the most done with this crap way, "Mice don't lay eggs," and walked off. Edit. I love how so many people in these replies are trying to find a different interpretation of what she must have meant, or say that she must have been joking, but no. Unfortunately, I have to tell you she was 100% of the opinion that mice lay eggs because she even doubled down about it later. Story 15. I had to explain to my 2 coworkers that it wasn't some magic fairy that was throwing away their coffee cups. They were joking around one day that their old coffee cups always disappeared by the next day, and I had to tell them it was me and that I had to start doing it because they kept getting left in the way and being knocked over. I was off for a few days and came back and there were cups everywhere. To be fair, where I live, grocery store eggs are kept near the milk and other dairy items. And grocery stores, as Joe Pera said, that's where the food is. By that reasoning, though, bulk nuts and chocolates are vegetables and spaghetti is a tomato product. Story 16. The dogs are artificially bred, and that there aren't wild golden retrievers, wild chihuahuas, and wild Maltese just running about that we're catching to make into pets. Story 17. That the Aztecs and Incans are not interchangeable. They were in completely different parts of the Americas, and that neither of them built the Nazca lines. But especially not the Aztecs, who were not inducting Peru. This person kept trying to tell me it was up to interpretation, like no, it's not. It's geography. Story 18. I had to explain to a restaurant worker that eggs are not dairy. Chickens do not have mammary glands. Someone who is allergic to dairy can eat eggs and chicken. Mayonnaise, containing eggs and oil, is therefore not dairy. She was looking at me like I was the stupid one the whole time. Story 19. I talked about this before and will until the end of days because this man deserves to be shamed. A 23-year-old man who had the right to vote, who had a driving license, who had a job and could get married and start a family, thought people were hanging the moon in the sky. Like the moon, Earth's natural satellite, was being hung on the sky like a painting on a wall. I'm still reeling over that one. This man had gone to school, had a formal education, and was actually going to college. He learned asterisk about that in primary school. And the kicker? I was the one to explain it to him because I was his girlfriend at the time, and let me tell you, things unraveled real fast when I started paying attention and saw through the smokescreen. Dude was willfully ignorant and bone-dead stupid on top of it. He was really, really good at hiding it. I dropped him like the mess he was and dived into more and more books to compensate the loss of brain matter I suffered from going out with him. I met a 40-something-year-old guy who told me the moon wasn't real. I said, "Sorry, what?" And another woman with us went, "No, hear him out. He makes some good points." Story 20. I work in travel. I've had to explain time zones more than you'd believe. So if you leave Sydney at 2 p.m. and fly approximately 14 hours, crossing the international date line, you arrive in LA at noon, about 2 hours before you left. I've watched this emoji happen in real time. Story 21. I had to explain to someone you can't buy like 2 pounds of lunch meat and eat it for a month. The concept of things spoiling was new to him. To be fair, we were both college students, and he was living alone for the first time. I used to work at a coffee shop and had to explain what filling something halfway meant to a woman I was training. She didn't understand the concept of half. Story 22, from a vet tech one, that the ticks on a male dog were actually nipples, and that male dogs have nipples, just like every other mammal. 2, that a rabbit that clearly has visible testicles was a male. 3, that you cannot feed an animal that is strictly a carnivore, a ferret, FYI, a vegan diet. That thing's so sick when it came in. 4, that yes, when you have 2 animals, same species, of opposite genders in the house, and they aren't spayed, neutered, they will breed. Even if they're mother, son, brother, sister, different ages, different sizes, different breeds, etc. You'd be shocked at how many people didn't think this would happen. O_O, like, do you understand biology at all? Story 23, that an item damaged in a car crash did not qualify as a manufacturer defect covered under warranty. The store refund policy was 90 days, and she had a receipt over a year old. Story 24, a girl was staying with my family and had brought her dog. The dog got hurt at one point, freak accident, that required surgery on a back leg and the cone of shame to be worn. At one point, she started cutting off a bit of the cone. Me, careful, cut too much, and he'll be able to reach his stitches. Her, that's all right. He'll be able to keep them clean. I had to explain to her, very slowly, that the purpose of the cone was to keep him from licking the stitches and pulling them out. She honestly thought the cone was just an aesthetic thing. Story 25. I had to explain to 2 teenage girls, 15 and 16, that the reason the candle went out was because they put the glass lid back on its jar. One of them said that fire can only be put out with water. I explained that fire needs oxygen, and putting the lid back on it cut the supply. When they didn't understand after explaining a few times, I had to explain it to them like toddlers. Fire is hungry, so it eats the air. When all the air is gone, it goes to sleep. Bye-bye, fire. The double O was too much. P.S. The look on their mama's face was so funny. She turned to me, threw her hands up, and said, "I've failed," in the most defeated tone. That poor woman. Edit. I would like to point out that we did, in fact, have a serious talk to these girls about proper fire safety and when to not use water on an open fire. Story 26. When pandemic first hit the US and there were no real treatments for it or vaccines or anything, I caught it and got lung clots and had to spend a week in the hospital. Numerous people on the floor I was on died. The guy in the bed next to me had it, and they had him under an oxygen tent. He fought with every single person that came in to check on him, refusing to believe that he had COVID. He thought literally everybody was lying to him about what was wrong with him. He wound up dying about the 4th day I was there. To this day, I hear people make comments that it doesn't exist or never did, or whatever dumb thing they have to say about it. I have to turn around and walk away from them, or ignore them on whatever platform I'm on to avoid smacking them up beside the head. Comment. Wow, this brought me back. I worked ICU during the pandemic. Although most of my patients were unconscious on ventilators, many of my awake patients and many families refused to believe in pandemic. Many believed we were doing something to them to make them sick. Even had patients rip their oxygen off and code and die, and families refused life-saving interventions because they didn't believe it was real and thought we were some big conspiracy. Absolutely maddening times. I felt like I was going crazy. I still have PTSD from it. Story 27. I had to explain to a fully grown adult that yes, your car's keyless entry remote does indeed have a battery in it just like a TV remote, and yes, the button stopped working because the battery is dead, and you need to replace it. I also had to tell him that if you're going to buy huge bags of dry dog food and keep it in your garage, which you leave open most of the time, you might want to actually close the bag and maybe even put the closed bag in a container with a lid instead of letting it sit completely open, and then always wondering why the dog food is full of bugs, spoils fast, and attracts rats and raccoons. I wish I could say he was a super brilliant engineer or something, but yeah, no. Story 28. that bocconcini, parmesan, and feta are dairy cheeses. I used to work in a pizzeria and had to explain to this vegan couple on multiple occasions that these cheeses all were made from dairy. It got to the point I had to grab the original containers and read the ingredients on the third, try to get it to sink in. Comment, not my encounter, but I'll share it anyway. My friend and her fiancé, who happened to be severely, deathly allergic to dairy, had an initial meeting with their wedding caterer. They stressed that dairy could absolutely not be used at all in anything, and requested to see the recipes for everything she proposed serving. The caterer seemed to understand and expressed that she was able to accommodate them without any issues. Then my friend received an email with the recipe for the proposed dairy-free cake. Oh boy, that sour cream in the cake and cream cheese in the frosting, and maybe something else. I don't recall. Turns out this professionally trained chef thought dairy meant milk only. My friend and her now husband canceled their contract with that catering company because they were certain he was going to die on their wedding day. I think they made the right call. I've worked in several restaurants and coffee shops, and there are servers/cooks/baristas who are convinced that people make up dietary restrictions for attention and will actively sabotage customers' food sometimes, or if they perceive them to be difficult. One to-go person switched sushi rolls BC, they weren't paying attention, and the customer called panicking BC she had bitten into a roll that had shellfish. She was allergic. I was so upset at the to-go person. Yes, people make mistakes, and I personally wouldn't go to a restaurant if I had a severe allergy, but people need to double-check stuff like that. If someone requests decaf, don't give them caffeine. If someone is dairy-free, don't steam oat milk in the milk pitcher. That's just a moral thing. Don't assume someone is faking an allergy or food preference. Sometimes it's a religious thing too. Story 29. I had to explain to a friend of mine who had grown up with me that no, you cannot vote for Trump in the Australian election. He is not a candidate for anything here. Story 30. Her child, my child's half-sibling, could not have inherited a trait from my child because that trait was inherited from me. But they're brothers. Comment. I had to explain to my husband that his biological son, I'm the stepmom, did not get his ADHD from me because I was the one to point it out, but from him because he's the bio-dad with ADHD himself, and it's genetic. He blamed me for about 2 years for his own kid having the same illness he has. Story 31. I had to explain to a doctor's receptionist from Michigan once that Canada was not located somewhere mysteriously across the ocean, but rather across the border from Michigan. My mom and I spent the car ride home in stunned silence. Story 32. That I could not steal a button from her Viber app. I work at the printing shop, and old people often come and give me their phone to send stuff on email or Viber or WhatsApp and print them. So one day, an old lady, Tilda 70 Yo, comes with her husband to print some documents. So I turn on the Wi-Fi, connect it, and send the PDF document on Viber. I printed it and said bye. The next day, she comes to my shop furious that I stole her direct photo send button on Viber. What happened? The app updated and the button is moved to another place. I explained it, but she couldn't believe me. She's convinced I stole the button and wants me to give it back. She was arguing with me for approximately half an hour until her husband asked her to drop it. She never came back. Story 33. Birthdays. I work in it, and when we have new employees start, their default password is their birthday using the 2-digit month, day, and year format. I cannot tell you how many adults get confused about this. I often have to explain that January is 01, February is 02, etc. Just yesterday, I had a 40-something start counting on her fingers trying to figure out what October was before typing in the wrong password 3 times. I finally just had to do it for her. This was not an isolated incident. I'd say it happens with at least a third of new employees. All adults. Story 34. A local manager once invited themselves to a team-building event I was holding for a group near their location. Problem was that I had to explain to them why a 51st person could not come to the dinner at a place with a strict 50-seater capacity. The restaurant in question was the Witchery in Edinburgh, and it was quite in demand at the time, so the manager really wanted to go. They actually used the phrase, "Do you know who I am?" at me when I kept pushing about who had invited them, because we both knew that no one had invited them, and I kept playing dumb and pushing. I had to bite my tongue when they asked if I knew who they were. Any number of comedy replies went through my head, and I quickly had to barge past them all and pick something less unemployment-worthy. Story 35. She said, "You saw 9/11s? You saw the planes hit the Twin Towers? You saw it with your own eyes?" Yes, along with a dozen other people on the roof of my building. I don't think she believed me. Story 36. There was an old woman who we shared an alley with when I was a kid, and she had several cats. She used to talk to them constantly, like in a normal conversational way. While this is very cute, I had questions. I said, "Why do you talk to your cats so much?" I was like 6 years old. And she said, "Cats understand every word we say, they just can't talk." I said that was not true, and she sat in her lawn chair, looked at one of them, and calmly said, "Butter, come sit with me, and I'll be damned if that cat didn't walk right over and sit on her lap." So I guess that was the day that the old woman across the alley had to explain to me that cats understand everything, they just can't talk. Story 37. how a shower curtain works. I kept finding the bathroom floor absolutely soaked after my roommate showered. I gently asked her to make sure the shower curtain was fully closed. Keeps happening. Finally, I figure out she's been drawing it closed asterisk, with the bottom fully outside the tub asterisk. Okay, sigh. So I draw her a diagram showing how, if you put the bottom of the curtain asterisk inside asterisk the tub, then the water routes back into the tub rather than on the floor. She was like, oh, you and your science? Then next time she comes out wrapped in a towel, which way does the curtain go again? We were both graduate students in science PhD programs. Story 38. In college, I had to stop my roommate from starting the microwave with his fork still in the dish that he was going to microwave. You take the fork out. What? Why? Microwave will catch on fire. I'm not putting it in long. Story 39. I might find myself explaining to an adult could be basic concepts about consent and boundaries. Sometimes people might not fully grasp how important it is to respect others' personal space or choices, and it can be unexpected to need to explain these fundamental principles. Story 40. One time at school, I'm a teacher, the electric went out completely. We were organizing for the kids to be picked up, and messages were being sent around by staff running here, there, and everywhere. One teacher asked me why they couldn't just send emails around. I said the electric was off. She said, yeah, we can get our emails on phones. I said, yeah, but the email servers are downstairs and the electric is off. She said, yeah, but our phones are working. I said, but the servers aren't. She threw her hands up and walked off saying I didn't understand. Story 41. That the Venus flytrap wasn't an alien species that landed on Earth carried by a meteorite. It took several minutes of conversation to convince them that this was not true. Story 42. I work in retail. Had just rang up a customer for a pair of shoes. Total came to $97.19. He gave me a $100 bill. I gave him his change and receipt. His wife comes in later to return them. I give her the $97.19. She goes, no, my husband gave you a $100 bill. I want the 100 back. I said, he did, but his total was only $97.19. So I gave him change back. She persists. She wants her $100 back. I said, ma'am, your husband only paid $97.19. So that is what you get back when you return the item. This duckin' woman. He gave you $100. I want the $100 back. This wasn't some sort of quick change scam. This woman was just dumb as a box of rocks. I told her, if you'd like to give me the $2.81 in change I gave him, I'd be happy to give you a $100 bill. She kept arguing with me for a minute, long enough for other people in line to speak up and tell her how stupid she was. Lamau eventually gave up and left with her $97.19. Story 43. This person was told as a child that they have locked their chickens away when it rains. Otherwise, they will open and lift their beaks up and drown. I laughed harder when I realized that she still believed it. Story 44. That you don't have to use the exact computer you sent the email from to view your emails. You can log in from any device and access them. This was to my boss. Story 45. My cat lost one of her legs, and a year or two later had a litter of kittens, one born with 3 legs. My sister thought the kitten inherited 3 legs from the mama, whose leg was amputated. Story 46. A Coinstar machine. I was working at a grocery store at the time, and one was at the front of the store. Walking by, I saw a woman struggling and asked if she needed help. She said that she accidentally hit the Spanish instead of English button on the start screen. I started to walk her through the directions to use it. Feed your coins into the hopper, and it will count and sort them, and at the end, take your receipt to customer service and get your cash. She was very annoyed with me at this point and exclaimed, but I don't want Spanish money, sigh. Story 47. That I can't have a conversation with you or take your requests whilst I'm in the middle of a song on stage. Seriously, I have speakers all around me. They are loud. I'm concentrating on my performance and making a connection with people in the room. I can't understand anything you're screeching at me, and no, yelling it louder is not the solution. If you have a request for the musician, wait until the set break, then ask them. Also, ask for one song. If they don't know it, you can ask for a different one. But if they don't know that either, then just thank them for their time. We're not jukeboxes. And if you don't like what we're playing, keep it to yourself. You chose to come to our gig. We didn't come to your living room. Story 48. The difference between the number 0 and the letter O when giving them a temporary password so they could get back into their account. The only thing I could think of was, well, one is a letter and one is a number, and it still didn't click for them. Story 49. I work in a long-term stay hotel. We get a lot of military and work crews staying there. There have been quite a few men in their 50s plus that have come to ask me how to use the washing machines. They're not complicated or anything. There's like 4 options: cycle type, water temp, soil level, load, water amount, a start button, and the spot to put the detergent. Usually their excuse is their wife has always done it for them. I also had to have a talk with a manager once who was messing up payroll. When submitting people's times, if they worked for 7 HRs and 30M, 730, she didn't put 7.3 hours rather than 7.5. Work 45 minutes of an hour. You guessed it, 0.45 instead of 0.75. I tried to explain it to her twice, but she couldn't get it. And I eventually had to reach out to the area manager to let him know what she was doing. Edit, spelling. Story 50. My brother's GF a long time ago. I knew her for years when the conversation happened. She started talking about a problem at work. She didn't understand the numbers on the air conditioning unit. Apparently, she never saw a weather forecast in her life, at least never paid attention to any. And she couldn't associate a temperature number with how hot or cold it is. She was around 25 or older. Story 51. That the answer to the job knowledge quiz was literally in the material they give you with the quiz. The whole team on days we have to re-up our quizzes asks, corkscrew fork, what's the answer to this one? And when I show them where to find it, they get mad and go ask someone else. Honorable mention to having to explain repeatedly how to round up down a number when we're doing inventory, and the system won't take the decimal. I can at least tell myself that they probably haven't thought about math since they left school. Story 52. I was on the Peak Tram in Hong Kong and a group of us students were riding with us. They asked me and my friends where we were from cause of our accents. We said South Africa. They said, "Where's that?" My guys, it's one of the only countries in the world where the directions are baked into the name. How do you not know what South or Africa mean? I'm not often rendered speechless, but that is one of those occasions. Story 53. When I was in the military, we had a new airman who I had to counsel on why it is important to shower, wear deodorant, wash your clothes, etc. We didn't work in the field or on the flight line where it may have been more acceptable to be stinky. We worked in the medical group, in patient care, and patients were complaining about his foul odor. Asterisk, asterisk, backstory, asterisk, asterisk. Apparently his mother took care of his laundry his whole life and would remind him to bathe. And since he was on his own now, he just hadn't really thought about it. Story 54. I had to explain to a university classmate in an art class that red paint and white paint mixed together made pink paint. I thought she was joking when she asked me how I made the pink paint I was using. Story 55. That Spaniards were European. My mom is racist, and we had a discussion when I told her her hate for the Spanish language is weird, since it's technically a colonizer's language like English is. She got confused, and I pointed out Spaniards are Europeans, and thus generally white people. She snidely said, "Well, that's your opinion." Oh ho ho. I had my laptop and she is technologically inept, so I Google imaged Spain people and then covered up the search bar. I called her over. Me. "Hey, Mom, would you say these people look like us?" Mom. "Yeah, of course." Me. "Would you say they are white?" Mom. "Yes, I would." I showed her the search bar, asked her to tell me what it said. She was so annoyed with me for that. My husband, then boyfriend, was just watching us go back and forth like it was a tennis match. Story 56. Taxes. You have to pay taxes on the items you purchase. No. I cannot just make the tax go away. No, I cannot include the tax in the price. And no, I'm not going to call someone to make it happen. Jewelry retail in a state that very much pays taxes on damn near everything. Story 57. If we inverted the polarity of the shops, air intake fan to be an exhaust fan, that we would not all suffocate. Seriously. I worked in a very large aerospace machine shop. For 8 years, I requested the air intake fan be reversed. Nothing happened. No acknowledgement of the request. For 8 years, I worked in a warehouse full of burnt metal smoke, vaporated coolant, adhesive vapors, etc. The air intake sock was at the highest point in the warehouse. It mixed fresh, cooler air with the hot, gross fumes, causing the whole shop to be smog-filled. The highest level manager was convinced an exhaust fan would extract all oxygen, leaving us literally in a vacuum. He never expressed thuis until an engineer on his last day would not drop the topic, and the reasoning slipped out. By the end of that day, fumes were exhausted. We all died, obviously. Per I did not do the explaining, but I did overhear the debate. Permission was not given. The plant manager left early, Friday norm. Polarity was changed. The engineer never came back. The manager took weeks to notice what had happened, regardless of the staff constantly dropping dead from having some clean air. Per Story 58. Having someone tell me the football game I'm watching is not live because it's dark here in Florida, while in California, there is still daylight. Time zones baffled them. Story 59. My grandpa asked where South Korea was when I told him my sister was doing a study abroad. Easy. Asia. G. I've never been to Asia. Me. Grandpa, you fought in Vietnam. G. So? Me. Sir, that's in Asia. G. Really? I guess I have been to Asia. Story 60. I had cancer in 2011. I'm fine now, and I shave my head regularly. One of my colleagues last week said that I must be sad to have no hair because I had cancer. I had to explain to her that my hair grew back. Look, I have eyebrows and there is hair on my arms, but I choose to shave my head because I look better that way. Story 61. One lovely day, I commented to the ex aloud how the clouds looked as they flowed up and down through the contours of a river valley as they floated by. She was mind blown, and when she told me what was astonishing to her, So was I. She thought clouds didn't move, as in they were fixed in place. She was in her 40s at that point. I had nothing to say to her about that. Story 62. My brother, who is 13 years older than me, thought slut meant someone who never finishes their projects, tasks. I had to explain to him the actual definition. Story 63. That the smell in your dish sponge and dish rags is because of bacteria, and that you need to wash them, and that they in fact clean themselves because you're using them with dish soap. Story 64. My ex-husband. I kept using his debit card to buy lunch for his office and act like a big shot. I kept asking him to stop, but he kept doing it. One day he came home from work all pissy at me because the card was declined and it embarrassed him. I explained that we didn't have enough money in our checking account to cover his extravagant generosity. He sputtered, but I always hit credit and don't use debit. I had to explain to Mr. Big Shot Manager that either way, the money still came out of our checking account. And that is why I kept telling him that the debit card was only for household purchases. Dumbass thought that by hitting the credit option, the card magically became a credit card and not a debit card. Story 65. That men and women have the same number of ribs. They were convinced that all men have one less rib than women because God took Adam's rib to make Eve. Edit. They were shown pictures of skeleton diagrams to prove that this was false and doubled down with, "No, I don't believe that." Story 66. Went to a trade show recently. We had a bunch of small but nice giveaways and some pricier ones for interesting people and potential customers. A few hours in, we had to put the expensive things away because grown-ass people would stand around arguing why they should be allowed to just grab a $50 item off the table. Story 67. Had a conversation with our friend last month who asked, because I'm pregnant, what our plans would be with our baby's belly button. When I inferred what the heck that could mean, he clarified that he wanted to know if we were choosing an innie or outie for him, as that is the result of where you choose to have the umbilical cord cut. I could not believe he sincerely thought that, and he was horrified when we explained that some of the umbilical cord has to fall off on its own postpartum, the sweet summer child. Story 68. I'm an engineer for a natural gas utility in a very big U.S. city. Years ago, our department hired a recent engineering grad, and I was, in part, responsible for getting him onboarded. We actually became pretty good friends over that time, and one day, while a few of us were having lunch, the topic of chicken eggs came up. He wasn't participating much in the conversation, which was unlike him, but during a pause in the talking, he says, "Isn't it weird how some eggs have chickens in them and others don't? How do they even know which ones to put in the cartons?" Needless to say, we thought it was a funny joke at the time, but we soon realized he was serious. I think the reason was his cultural background or something, one where fertilization wasn't really taught or even discussed. Anyways, he had a hard time living that one down. Story 69. I had to tell a group of 20-year-old British kids how to eat corn on the cob. A tour guide bought some for everyone, and these 5 were completely flabbergasted about how to eat the corn while it was still on the plant. Story 70. To my eldest father, he was convinced his landlord was paying $5,000 a month for his bills. He showed me a bill. I then had to tell him that his landlord isn't paying his bill, and he actually owes the energy company $5,000. Story 71. That the earth was bigger than the moon. Long story short, this was the beginning of the end of our marriage. He and I had an argument in front of the kids the entire 5-hour drive. He was telling the kids how stupid I was to correct daddy. Mush. Story 72. I have a co-worker that seems to be dead set against any renewable energy. I was talking to him one day about solar farms and how we need to invest more to maximizing the efficiency of the panels. His response: what happens to the earth when we suck up all the sun's rays? It took a good 30 minutes of explaining how the sun works, and that the interior of the earth is in no way heated by the sun. Dude is like in his late 60s and is a retired Air Force pilot, and also retired from Lockheed as a mechanical engineer. Story 73. I had to explain to my friend that when she feeds her dog breakfast and then he goes number 2 a few minutes later, that he didn't just poop out the food he just ate. He pooped out the food that he ate from the day before. Story 74. Not me, but my husband and his brother. The brother got divorced at 42 and promptly started entertaining a number of younger, 20-something women. My husband said, "I hope you're using protection." And his brother said, "No, these are good girls, they don't have anything." To which my husband replied, "Yeah, but you don't need to be impregnating all these women." And his brother said, "No, bro, I can't. My biological clock and all that." It took a bit of conversation and Googling to prove to him that men can still produce children at 42, and even well into retirement age. Story 75. Passenger in my friend's car in a parking lot, I noticed someone about to pull out in front of us and pointed and said, "Watch out, this guy's reversing." Sure enough, the other driver pulled out and my friend was like, "Wow, how did you know?" Because his reverse lights were on. His what? His reverse lights. The white lights on the back of the car That come on, when you put your car in reverse. My friend was mind blown. He had no idea. This wouldn't have been so bad if he wasn't literally driving me to the driver's test center to do my road test. And asterisk, he was the one who taught me to drive asterisk. Story 76. I had a housemate who was convinced that running an empty air fryer would burn the house down. Never mind that the owner's manual asterisk says asterisk to do it. And of course, you wouldn't do it unattended. Story 77, worked at a pizza place that you ordered at the counter. We had a sign hanging above that said, place order here, with arrows pointing down. I go to the dining area to get a soda, and this family asks when someone will come take their order. I told them you need to order at the counter, and they were all perplexed and said they'd never heard of that before. I shrugged my shoulders and went back around to take their order at the counter. The dad was perturbed while placing the order, and I was short with him, just trying to take the order. After he paid, he said, sorry if I was a little rude to you, I've been with them all day, pointing at his family Lolo. Story 78, that 90 seconds is the same as a minute and 30 seconds. This person was yelling at me about there not being a 90-second preset button on the microwave. I showed them how to use the 1-minute preset, the 30-second preset, and how to just program it for a minute and a half. Story 79. What type of meat comes on a balai? I was a waitress and had a party of 40. Larger parties had a preset menu. The person making the reservation selected the menu items in advance. And we always placed a large chalkboard menu in the party room. This grown-ass lady, who had managed to keep herself and other humans alive long enough for her to have grandchildren, spent 10 full minutes questioning me about what kind of meat comes on a balti, not what type of bacon. She fully acknowledged that bacon was an ingredient. She could not comprehend that bacon was the meat of the sandwich. Story 80. That if you can't make it to an agreed-upon appointment, you call. Don't just leave me hanging, wondering if you got hit by a train. Don't just pull up 2 hours late and pretend nothing happened, starting small talk. Still can't believe I had to tell her that yes, I would indeed like to be informed. B. Story 81. My boss's wife was learning how to use a computer. She typed in the numbers 1 to 9 and then asked how you typed in a number 10. We were very diplomatic. Story 82. When I got my tubal ligation at 30, I was absolutely floored at the amount of women who said, oh, so you're not going to have a period anymore, right? Even my licensed optician boss, who had been an LPN at one time, made that comment. Story 83. I live on an island, and many years ago, I met a visitor who argued with me that it wasn't necessary to take a ferry to travel to the island. He kept telling me he hadn't taken a ferry, and I was wrong until his wife told him he'd slept through the ferry ride. Honestly, I don't judge him for being wrong about the ferry, but I still think about how he was unnecessarily a dick about it. Story 84. Had to explain to a middle-aged man that if he books a flight for 0045, he will be leaving in the middle of the night. When it's dark outside, yes, like when you're sleeping. In fact, 12 a.m. is indeed the middle of the night and not lunchtime. He refused to listen and booked an overnight departure. I couldn't convince him. Story 85. This is my mom's story, not mine. But when her neighbor lady was pregnant for the first time, she asked my mom, who already had children, how the baby would get out. Thinking she was goofing around, my mom wisecracked, same way it got in there. And the poor dear genuinely didn't know how that had happened either. Story 86. That a friend of mine, asterisk, who grew up in the countryside in Ireland, asterisk, told me that butter wasn't dairy, but cheese was. I asked her what she thought butter was made from. Shocked Pikachu face. Story 87. A coworker not only thought that chupacabras were real, but that they were well-understood animals, every bit known to science as the goats they prey upon. She was in disbelief when I explained they're cryptids in the same vein as Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Story 88, that a chai latte didn't have any coffee in it. She thought because a latte is typically referred to as a coffee that a chai latte also had coffee. Had to explain that latte was just an abbreviation for cafe latte, and latte is in fact milk. Story 89. That just because I'm Hispanic doesn't mean I'm Mexican. She thought that Hispanic was only used to describe Mexicans. My family is from El Salvador. I was in my early 20s and she was in her late 40s. Story 90. That cursive is not another language. This person saw cursive writing and commented on me being bilingual. I had to explain that the words I had written were, in fact, still in English. She didn't believe me. Story 91. I moved to Anchorage for college when I was 19. I drove from the East Coast in the US. Had a date later on in life that asked me how I drove to an island. We only had one date. Story 92. I had to explain numerous times to my husband that his suitcase couldn't weigh more than 23 Ks and that it was the airline's policy and that 25 Ks was an option. Story 93. We were actually teenagers. But a dude I knew said Asian girls had sideways vaginas and if you spread their legs, it would close. Evidently, you had to push them together to open them. Story 94. How come it didn't rain above the clouds when it was raining below them? We were on a plane where a friend asked me why. People around us started laughing quite a bit. Story 95. That you have to have a printer to print things at home. Tech support, and I wish I was lying. Did they think they could click print and it would come out of their computer, or did they expect it to appear on their desk in printed form as if by magic? I had to bite my tongue and refrain from asking if he thought the print jobs were going to waft down from the ceiling or something. Story 96? Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and Italy is not a town in France. Same guy. My sister dated him for far too long. My sister-in-law used to believe France was a city in Italy. I'd love to get these two in a room together to fight about who is correct. Story 97. My God, I had an old boss that would ask me if I couldn't just hold it when I had to run to the bathroom. I'm a bartender. No, one of the reasons a woman would go to the bathroom is unholdable. Just last year, I became aware of the number of men that think you can't urinate with a tampon in. They needed an explanation of how many holes a woman has down there. Please continue making medical choices for me. OMG, my partner literally thought this. And I had to explain to him that women cannot, in fact, do Kegels so intense we form a vacuum seal on our pussy to keep our menstrual flow in. Story 98. The difference between Chinese and Japanese people. When I was a kid, other kids told me Japanese eyes slanted up and Chinese slanted down. Then our friend from Korea moved here and just blew that whole paradigm right out of the water. Story 99. My mother once had to explain to a fellow teacher that humans only have one appendix. Comment. That's not true. I read all about it in a big fancy book. It had a whole chapter about Appendix A and another one about Appendix B. I can understand why you didn't know about that, though. They saved it for the end because it was the most complicated part, so maybe you didn't get there. Story 100. I was amazed in my old workplace how many young adults, like early 20s or so, couldn't tell the time from the wall clock. Recently, my 18-year-old daughter asked me what time it is, and I glanced at the wall clock and told her 7:55. Her jaw dropped and she said, "How did you do that?" "Hun," I looked at the clock. I've tried to teach her telling time on analog clocks since she was 4 years old. She just does not get it.